What has been the most horrible experience of your life? Story 1. Getting a message on MySpace, it was 2006, from my brother's boss asking if I had talked to him. This was a Monday and I hadn't talked to him all weekend. Unusual. But his phone message said, "Hey, if I don't answer, it's because something is wrong with my phone." So I was not concerned. The second message said that he had missed a flight on Saturday to a conference. My heart dropped to my feet. I called her and told her to go to his apartment, as I knew what was wrong. My brother had epilepsy his whole life and always had seizures in the shower. I just knew he was in that shower. We lived 8 hours apart, so I felt helpless. I made the decision to call my mom, which was very hard, because by calling her, I was acknowledging that something could be wrong. My mom quickly got on the ball, as I was an utter mess at this point. Sitting there waiting was horrible. She called me back about 30 minutes later and yelled, "What is your dad's number?" Several times in between me saying, "What happened?" Finally, she choked out, "He's gone." My whole world shattered with those two words. My awesome brother, my best friend, who shared my history, was gone forever. He had a seizure in the shower and drowned. On Saturday, 2 days before they found him. 2 hours later, my mom and I were on a plane to Chicago. It has been almost 7 years, and as I write this, it still doesn't seem real. I read this quote: "When you lose a parent, you lose your past. When you lose a spouse, you lose your present. When you lose a child, you lose your future. But when you lose a sibling, you lose your past, present, and future." This has always resonated with me. I am now an only child. Story 2. When I was 16, my brother, my dad, and I went to LA from BC, Canada, to visit the lady he had been seeing for a while online. They had met before when she came to visit us. We were there for Christmas and New Year's and had driven down in my grandparents' truck. They had a car they usually drove. Well, one morning we couldn't find him. We figured he had gone out for a walk somewhere because he wasn't in his bed. Her kids were there, so they slept in different rooms. And the truck was outside. Plus, he had a bad temper sometimes and had lost his temper the night before. I was sitting in the remodeled garage watching a movie when I heard her start screaming and crying, then calling 911. I sat there until some fireman came and told me he had had a heart attack in the middle of the night and died. It was his second heart attack, and it taught me that it isn't only overweight people who have heart attacks. He was about 150 pounds and around 5 feet 11 inches, I think. I had to go upstairs with the fireman to tell my brother, who was confused because in Canada, first responders come with an ambulance, not a fire truck. That was hard. It was harder still to call my mom, parents were long divorced, and my grandma to tell them he was gone. My grandma was trying desperately to deny it, asking if I was my cousin, whose father had died a few years before, or someone pulling a prank. Fortunately, because of his poor health, my dad had the foresight to set up insurance, just in case. Life insurance, mortgage insurance, and travel insurance, so we could fly back with his girlfriend as our escort. It's been almost 14 years, and thinking about that day is still really hard, especially since I didn't really grieve for a long time. Story 3. Toss-up between getting divorced and seeing a man eviscerated. Divorce is horrible, no real explanation needed there. Concerning the evisceration, I will tell the story. I was out at a bar in an area where a fair amount of bar fights happen. They were usually just fist fights. No big deal, really. Once someone hit the floor, all involved parties were kicked out of the bar, and everyone just partied on. Pretty typical for Texas in the late 90s and early 2000s. One night, the guy who hit the floor was not happy about getting beat up in public. As the combatants were being kicked out, he drove a knife into his opponent's abdomen and ripped it laterally until the blade tore free from the flesh. The man who had been stabbed just grabbed his intestines and fell to the ground, trying to hold his organs inside. The attacker leaned down, grabbed the other man's intestines, and pulled. He pulled out about 4 feet of internal organs and spit on the man's face. At this point, roughly 10 men beat the living daylights out of the attacker and tied him up in a hog-tie position with some guy's belt. Since seeing that, I have been unable to watch anything on television or film that has realistic gore, even though I know it is just an effect. Story 4. I was a 9-year-old girl. I was upstairs trying to sleep. I heard a lot of shouting downstairs, followed half an hour later by screaming. So I went downstairs and into the living room and saw my father had pinned my mother to the couch, her hair held in his right hand, knife in his left, at her throat. I screamed. He stared at me with the most murderous eyes I've ever seen, jumped off, and lashed at me. I ran for the phone to dial emergency services, and he punched me repeatedly and slashed me a few times until I fell, calling me a traitor, an accident, a disgrace, and other awful things, then cut the phone cable. He then had a dissociative episode. He suddenly had no idea what was going on and became overwhelmed with guilt after assessing the situation. He grabbed a gas can, poured it over himself and as much of us as he could, grabbed a matchbox, started shouting how much we had failed him as a family and crying, and sat there threatening to ignite everything. After my mother talked him down, he overdosed on his medication in a suicide attempt and ended up writhing on the floor before passing out. My mother took me to bed and tried to sing me to sleep with a very hollow rendition of Let It Be, while we were both in shock, smelling of blood and gasoline. It felt very much like some twisted scene from a horror film. Story 5. Hiking with my partner, it started pouring. A river we had to cross rose up significantly by the time we got to it. This is the same river one of my cousins and her boyfriend drowned in about 5 years earlier. He said he was going to check the river a bit further up while I was securing our 2 dogs to a rope. When I looked up, he was already gone. I didn't know which direction he went or if the river had taken him. Instead of coming right back to tell me his plan, he was gone for almost half an hour. In that time, I went through denial, anger, grief, and acceptance at least 4 times. I was ready to turn back the way we came and look for help when he reappeared on the other side of the river. Then he tells me he did something very stupid to cross and did not want to try it again. So I had to help him cross right there. Let's just say I almost lost him twice to the current during the crossing. One of the dogs somehow came loose and tried to help him. It was either him or her, so I had to let her get swept away. We found her downriver, unharmed. Horrible experience. Thankfully, we can laugh about it now. Story 6. I was around 6 or 7 when I went with my dad to a deer lease to watch him hunt. One of the nights there, he parked his truck in the middle of some field and told me to stay in the truck and never to leave. He and his buddies walked far off somewhere. I can't remember what they were doing. It felt like an eternity just sitting there doing nothing, alone in the dark. I wasn't really feeling all that comfortable or safe. I hadn't eaten in hours and I was getting fed up. So I decided to go find my dad myself. I hopped out of the truck and fell flat on the ground. Soon enough, I felt a stinging sensation all over the front and back of my body. Guess what I fell on? A huge cactus. I was screaming in pain for 15 minutes straight until my dad and his buddies ran over to me, with horrified looks on their faces. Story 7. February 14th, 1999. My girlfriend, now wife, and I had just gotten back to her parents' house from a Valentine's Day lunch at Olive Garden. We were 17 years old. Her parents were downtown enjoying their own Valentine's Day lunch. I remember telling my girlfriend I had a headache. She handed me a Dixie cup with 2 Excedrin in it. That's when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw a towering man in a long, beige trench coat with a local police officer standing behind him. The large man turned and nodded, dismissing the officer, who left. The man then asked if my girlfriend's parents were home. I said no, and he said, "We've got some information about R, my girlfriend's older brother." My girlfriend, now standing next to me, asked what was going on. The man repeated himself, and I sort of smirked at her, since her brother had been getting into some silly legal trouble over the last couple of years. I then told the man, "You can tell us what's going on, I'll let his parents know." The man very gently said, "At about 4 o'clock this morning, R was shot, and he didn't make it." The world began spinning. My girlfriend hit the floor. We both began crying. After a few minutes, we realized the man was still standing at the door. He asked if he should wait to tell her parents and asked that I phone them to tell them to come home. That was the worst call I've ever made. I didn't actually tell them what happened, just that they needed to stop whatever it was they were doing and come home immediately. My girlfriend asked that we not be there when her parents found out. Too emotional, so we left and returned shortly after the man told her parents and younger sister. The following few days are a blur. Story 8. I was sexually assaulted a few years ago over the course of 2 days. I was placed in high-risk therapy, which is basically therapy on steroids because around 80% of the cases referred to them were at risk of ending in homicide. I was fired from my job because my performance declined. I ended up back on a pull-out sofa at my mom's house. My high school sweetheart came and rescued me. He took me to a foreign country where he lived to help me regain control of my life and, well, just get away from it all. A few weeks into living abroad, I got on his Skype account to contact my family. His last conversation was still open. It was between him and his recent ex. They broke up around the time he contacted me. He was telling her how much he missed her and how he regretted bringing me out there because I had baggage. He openly discussed the details of my assault, something I barely wanted him to know. I don't know what was worse, being betrayed by the only person I ever truly wanted since high school, or losing all control of my life because of the trauma I experienced. Story 9. 4 experiences really broke me. My first wife attempting suicide for the first time, catching a girlfriend of 3 years cheating on me, my daughter dying in my arms while my wife and I tried in vain to rush her to the hospital, then my wife emotionally abusing and blaming me, before divorcing me after our daughter's death. By far the worst was my daughter dying in my arms. I can still feel her cries and gasps that woke us up, her weight as I scooped her up out of bed, her last raspy breaths growing weaker and shallower until they stopped, her head rolling limply against my shoulder, and the warmth from her urine on my arm and stomach as her body released itself. I just squeezed her so tightly, stroked her head, and told her over and over again how much I loved her. It's a moment I never want to forget, ever. Just like I don't want to forget every other moment we spent together. It's been 2 years and I miss her every single day. Her hugs, her smile, the way she always ran to me whenever I picked her up from somewhere. Since then, even on the best days, my life has felt like an empty shell. I'm just waiting to die so I can see her again. Everything I love goes away. She was the one who loved me back. Story 10. July 12th, 2012. I had gotten a call from my mom while at work. I originally missed the call, but I just knew from the words "missed call mom" and the voicemail message that it wasn't anything good. I listened to the voicemail before calling her back. Her voice quivered slightly, calmly telling me that I needed to leave work and come to the hospital. I called her back, and she said that my siblings were flying in for a few days and that I needed to get to the hospital immediately. I remember that moment, standing outside my work, knowing exactly what was going to happen in the next few days. It felt like a cinder block had just been placed in my stomach. I sat down against the wall for a few minutes before going to tell my boss what was up. I didn't even have to explain it to him. I guess the look on my face said it all. He told me not to worry about coming back to work for a while. He's known my family my whole life and already knew the story. My dad had recently been readmitted to the hospital with a failing liver. He had been on the transplant list for about 2 years. He was doing okay for a while until he got an infection he just couldn't shake. I had been trying to stay busy at work, trying not to think about the fact that we had just put him on an intubator. The entire hour-and-a-half drive to the hospital, the local one couldn't treat him. He had to be moved to the major hospital in Rochester. All I could think about was how happy I was that our last conversation, a week before, was a good one. Beyond that, I was on autopilot. The scene at the hospital wasn't a happy one. Everyone was solemn and stone-faced, except for my mom, who had clearly been crying before I arrived. This went on all day until we went to stay at my aunt's house. The next day, we had a meeting with the doctor who told us there was nothing else they could do. My father couldn't handle transplant surgery because of the infection, and his body couldn't fight it off any longer. We had to take him off life support. We said our goodbyes, tears streaming down our faces, and gave the signal for the nurses to do what they had to do. I'll never forget those 5 minutes, watching my dad, my hero, slowly drift into nothingness. The doctor assured us that this was the right decision because my dad went so quickly after being removed from life support. It meant he was ready to go, but that didn't mean the rest of us were ready for him to go. The 2.5 years of him being sick were filled with some of the most difficult and painful experiences of my life. But I would go through it all again, just to hear him laugh one more time. Story 11. It's a tie, laser eye surgery, PRK, so they numb your eye with drops. Then they drop down this little circular thing, fill it with some fluid that removes the top layer of your eye, and take it off. Then they use metal pins to scrape the remaining top layer of your eye off. Then they squirt more stuff into your eye. The doctor puts his hand on your forehead and says in a very serious voice, "Watch the red dot. Do not look away. Do not move a muscle in your whole body." Then the laser kicks in. You can smell your eye burning. Your vision gets all wacky and black and spotted. It gets harder to see the red dot. The red dot seems to drift in your vision. Do I follow it drifting? Do I stare straight ahead? I guess I'll follow it. I hope I'm not doing any damage. Then it's over. Time for eye number 2. The other thing is I got hit by a car when I was 12. I was on my bike, riding across the crosswalk, and she was going much faster than I thought and not looking at the road. I don't remember actually getting hit, but I do remember lying on the road. I couldn't move my body. I thought I was paralyzed. I screamed every swear word I knew, which was a fair amount since I had seen a few episodes of South Park, which was in its first season. I was terrified. Then I slowly regained movement in my body. My leg was one giant bruise, and I had a super deep cut in the back of my head where I smacked the pavement, no helmet. But I was ecstatic I wasn't paralyzed. I still have a bump on the back of my head where I hit. Story 12. Driving 900 miles the day after graduation, blowing all of my open house money to be with my girlfriend who had moved away a year prior. We had seriously planned this for quite some time. I had a job set up down there. I was admitted to the local university, was looking at apartments. We had talked about how we were still in love and were just ripped apart too soon. We talked every day. However, she failed to mention one giant thing. She had a boyfriend down there who was living with her, which I found out shortly after walking in the door. I didn't drive my own vehicle. I rode with her dad. So I was stuck there for 2 weeks until he had to drive back up for work. I tried to be civil and not flip out, despite having every right. But mostly I just got wasted and smoked with her now. Boyfriend, he was a pretty cool dude, and he was oblivious to the whole thing and just doing what any guy would do. But regardless, 2 weeks of sleeping on the couch while this dude was with the woman I loved was quite unpleasant. I never really made it clear to her how wrong what she did was. I just smiled and left, penniless, heartbroken, and lost. Story 13. 5 years ago, I was at my then boyfriend's house for dinner when I got a phone call from my dad. He said my mom and sisters had gotten into an accident about 4 hours from home, and we needed to go to the hospital. The ride there was oddly calming because I had this feeling everything would be all right. I remember getting really tired, and my last thought was, what would I do if someone in my family died? Well, at least I'll have youngest sister to help me through. It never occurred to me she was even hurt. I woke up a couple hours later when we pulled up to the hospital. My dad had my brother and me wait in the waiting room for a half hour with our whole extended family. I don't know how I didn't realize something bad had happened at that point. I just couldn't imagine my life without any of them. So it didn't make sense that we could function as a smaller family. It just couldn't happen. My dad brought my brother and me back into a small doctor's office and told us that my youngest sister had died. My brother immediately started crying, but I just went numb. I felt like my life was almost meaningless at that point. As the oldest and she the youngest, I took care of her as if I were her second mother. I picked out her clothes, did her hair, took her to the mall. I taught her to read. I even helped change her diapers when I was 6. She was 5 years younger than me, but I was closer to her than to anyone else on earth. I've still never loved someone as much to this day. The worst part was going to see my mom. She had a broken rib, a punctured lung, cracked vertebrae, and was hooked up to all these machines in the ICU. As soon as we walked in, she tried calling for me, but could hardly speak. I walked over and she started crying and said, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm so sorry." My mom knew I'd take it the hardest of everyone in the family. She told me, "You know how you took care of her for all those years? Now it's time for her to take care of you. She's your angel now." I kind of went numb for a few years after that. I'm only now beginning the grieving process. It's been a long 5 years, but it still only feels like yesterday I could just walk down the hall to her room and wake her up for school. I miss her every day. Story 14. My mom was with a really difficult and aggressive man. For whatever reason, they were having a huge fight that night, and since he had a history of being violent, she, after having been drinking, decided to take us to a hotel. Along the way, she got pulled over with me in the car. Needless to say, getting pulled over for a DUI with your approximately 13-year-old son in the car isn't a good thing. She ended up asking my dad to watch me. They had been divorced since I was 5, and for the few years leading up to that, my dad and I hadn't really spoken. He wasn't someone who treated his son very well. My dad also disliked my mom a lot. He was the kind of person who couldn't let things go and often treated her poorly, only seeing the bad in her. Within the first couple of days of staying with my dad, and the few days before had already been incredibly tough on me, especially since I didn't like him, he received a call. Apparently, my mom was in the hospital. We went to the hospital and found out that my mom had attempted to take her own life. Being there with my dad made everything even more difficult. To his credit, for about 3 or 4 months after that day, he managed to be a decent parent to me. But eventually he slipped back into heavy drinking, drug use, and became verbally and mentally abusive again. Still, going to see my mom in the hospital after what she had done was incredibly hard on me. Story 15. My mother had recently passed away from cancer, and as a way of coping, I became hopelessly addicted to synthetic drugs. I was smoking between 3 and 10 grams a day and never allowed myself to come down for any reason. I had used it occasionally before her passing as a way to achieve a legal high, but never abused it the way I did after losing her. After about a month, I found a particular product called Ultimate and began purchasing 10-gram jars of it for just $30. My usage ramped up dramatically. Ultimate gave me a high I had only ever experienced with top-shelf marijuana. Even though I knew how dangerous synthetic drugs were to both my mind and body, I kept increasing my intake. Once I was consuming about half a jar a day, 5 grams, something strange happened. I developed an intense fixation on contact juggling. No, seriously, I could pick up any object and immediately feel its center of gravity. I understood its contours instantly and could manipulate it across my body or fingertips with incredible speed and precision. It fascinated both my friends and myself. I would get lost in it, spending hours, sometimes days, just juggling. My favorite object was my small but heavy metal pipe, but I also used lighters, knives, even wooden staves. After 2 weeks, I concluded that my juggling ability was directly proportional to how high I was. So I pushed even further, consuming a full jar per day. I started using a balloon to inhale each hit multiple times. The effect was mesmerizing. My coordination skyrocketed, and I became completely absorbed. At times, I was convinced that I was moving objects so fast they were generating heat or even emitting light. Friends would come over, and I'd be in a haze. I'd try to interact, but I was so taken by juggling that I couldn't pull myself away. About a month later, the episode started. While focused on an object, I would suddenly snap back, and my mind would be racing. The first time it happened, I believed my bedroom was about to be sucked into a massive vortex of wind. I didn't know why or how, but I was sure it was coming. I dove for the doorway in panic and hit the floor hard, which brought me back to reality. I didn't smoke anymore that night, but I resumed the next morning. The second episode came while I was in the garage. I had just smoked a large bowl of Ultimate, inhaling through the balloon, and began juggling. At some point, I felt a wave of dread coming. I tried to tell myself, "You're fine. There's nothing wrong," but it didn't work. I quickly spiraled into a panic attack. I started walking to my room, but the terror grew so intense that my body broke into a run. It felt like I was a little girl running from a giant wolf, exactly the imagery that filled my mind. I knew my fear was irrational, but it didn't matter. I collapsed beside the bed, waking up my girlfriend. She spent the next 2 hours trying to calm me down, guiding me through breathing techniques to make sure I didn't stop breathing, which was my biggest fear during the episode. That incident kept me off synthetics for a few days, but like a fool, I went back one last time. I resumed my routine: smoke a bowl, use the balloon, juggle. I'd gone for 4 hours, 2 bowls per hour, when the third and final episode hit me. I abruptly stopped juggling, dropped the object, and stood up. My vision seemed to expand. My head felt clearer than ever. Possessed by the feeling and heavily under the influence, I stumbled outside. My body barely functioned, but my mind was racing. I felt like I could think every thought in existence all at once. It was liberating, powerful. I made it to the driveway and leaned on my car, realizing that thinking every thought imaginable isn't as magical as it sounds. My brain began counting the hairs on my head, the leaves on the trees, the blades of grass. Then it tried to break them down into components, then smaller components. Panic set in as I realized the overwhelming vastness of reality. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I closed my eyes. It didn't help. I opened them. It got worse. The terror returned. And like a fool, I looked up into the night sky. Story 16. Viral meningitis was pretty nasty. I was a normally fit and healthy 20-year-old man when I went to the doctor for 3 or 4 days in a row, complaining of a headache and back pain. Eventually, I saw a different doctor and was rushed to the hospital with a very high viral load. I was hospitalized for about a week, during which time I had 2 lumbar punctures after a student doctor messed up the first, and was put on push-button morphine because of the level of pain I was experiencing. When I was discharged, I wasn't able to stand, sit, or even raise my head from a horizontal position without experiencing blinding headaches. This continued for a month, during which I was prescribed the strongest codeine tablets available. Over the next few weeks, my condition slowly improved, and I was weaned off the painkillers. But that bout of meningitis took it out of me, and it was probably 6 months before I felt back to normal. Story 17. Through college, I was an RA to save money, free room and board, and I was pretty lenient with my residents. I felt my job was to keep kids out of trouble, not throw them into it. Before my junior year, I proposed to the love of my life, and she said yes. I had never been so happy. Throughout the year, everything was great. We had a dog, we video called every night before bed, and we were happy. Around May of my junior year, she began acting strange. She started forgetting things we did every night, like our nightly video calls. Our schools were a few states apart, or even just a text to say goodnight. Thursday nights at a party school are rough for RAs. Whoever is on duty has to stay up until 3 a.m. and make rounds, quieting down parties, helping drunk students to bed, that kind of thing. One night, I couldn't get in contact with my fiancée. No replies to my texts. I called, and her phone was off. That was unusual. I got worried. At 3 a.m., I packed up from the office and started heading to bed when a girl ran up frantic, saying someone was in the girl's bathroom stall and not responding. I figured it was another drunk who'd passed out. I followed her and saw a girl's shoes under the stall. I banged on the door, called out, no response. I climbed up to look over and saw her head in the toilet. I did everything I could to get that door open. After a few kicks and shakes, it budged. She was tiny, probably 95 to 105 pounds, maybe 18 years old. Her face was underwater, and the toilet was full of vomit. I pushed her back to try to wake her. Nothing. I grabbed her by her jacket and lifted her head out of the water. Her body collapsed onto me, limp. Her eyes were open, rolled back. She wasn't breathing. I turned to the girl who found her and said the only words I could manage, "She's not breathing." There I was, covered in this poor girl's vomit, holding her limp body, wondering what I'd tell her parents. Could I have gotten there sooner? I shook her, patted her back, prayed. Suddenly, she gasped. Water and vomit poured out of her mouth all over me. That breath nearly made me cry. She had survived. She was still unresponsive when EMTs arrived. They said she had about 30 seconds left before serious brain damage or death. I woke up my boss, told him what happened, wrote the incident report. He saw I was shaken and told me to take a few days off. He talked to my professors. Go see her, he said, my fiancée. I tried calling and texting again. Nothing. It was late, so I let it go and tried to sleep. The next morning, still no response. I needed to get away. I got in my car and drove 3 hours to her parents' house. She usually went there on Fridays to get stuff, do homework, and prep for her weekend job. We worked weekends together at the same store, saving up for the place we were moving into after college, just 3 weeks away. She wasn't home yet, so I sat with her dad, had a beer, and told him the story. He was stunned and asked if I was okay. I told him I hadn't been able to reach his daughter. When she got home, I hugged her and said she wouldn't believe what had happened. She was oddly cold. I told her the whole story, how scared I'd been. She stayed distant and finally said, I need to tell you something. My heart sank, I knew. It was written all over her face. I slept with someone. Those words are burned into my memory. Everything stopped. My senses shut down. I couldn't hear. My vision blurred. My skin tingled. My mouth went dry. Not even 24 hours after what I thought was the worst night of my life, my fiancée admitted she had been unfaithful, and then she twisted the knife. It's been going on for a while. I stumbled out to my car in shock, drove back to campus in a haze. I bought a handle of rum and went to the river near school, our usual peaceful spot, and drank the entire bottle in what felt like minutes. I blacked out, hoping to drift away in the current. I didn't intend to wake up. Luckily, a friend of mine who knew everything came looking for me. He knew I might come to that spot. He found me face down, inches from the water, and rushed me to the hospital. He saved my life. I woke up in the ER filled with needles. My stomach had been pumped. I was told I wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. In just a few hours, the life I had planned was completely destroyed. I was emotionally wrecked. It took me over a year to date again. I still struggle with trust. I'm afraid to say I love you to my girlfriend of over a year now. I'm writing this all down in hopes it helps, because I can't keep it in forever. Story 18. Probably going on an LDS mission. I was only at the training center for a week, but it was hell. I didn't eat for the first 2 days. The food was terrible. I didn't want to be there, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. The more I expressed that I wanted to go home, the more I was pressured to stay. I called home, and nobody seemed to care. They just said I needed to be there. Finally, I broke down and demanded to be released, and they let me go. The next 3 months, I felt like I wanted to end my life. Everyone in my life looked at me differently. My mom begged me to publicly apologize at church for letting everyone down. It was incredibly upsetting. My now wife's bishop told her to leave me behind because I was going nowhere in life, and she should be married and starting a family. She was only 21 at the time. Story 19. I held my fiance's hand as she took her last breath after having laparoscopic surgery so the doctors could determine how far the cancer had spread. It had spread a lot, and the shock to her body from the surgery was too much for her to take. She died a month before her 32nd birthday. Before this, doctors had told her she would most likely need a full hysterectomy. That was already devastating because she wanted children so badly. Coming to terms with the fact that we'd never have biological children was heartbreaking. It's been almost 3 years, and I still miss her deeply. Before this, the worst moment of my life had been coming home to find my dad had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Life really hurts sometimes, but you can't let it break you forever. You just have to keep moving forward and believe that things will get better, because eventually they do. Story 20. When I was 9, I was walking home from school, and during that 10-minute walk, I became suddenly very ill. It felt like the flu and hit me fast and hard. I had severe uncontrolled asthma back then, and by the time I reached my front door, I was crawling because I couldn't breathe. The cold air had triggered my lungs badly. My fingertips were turning blue. I had a nebulizer, which I grabbed and took to bed with me. I laid down because I was too short of breath to even sit up. I used the nebulizer with some steroid medication for 3 or 4 hours straight until my stepdad got home. The first thing he saw was that I hadn't done my chores, and he was furious. He busted into my room and started yelling because the dishes were dirty. He grabbed me by my hair and dragged me into the hallway. Still holding my hair, he lifted me off the ground and with his other hand grabbed my ribs and pinned me to the wall. I was really tiny, and his hand reached across my entire abdomen. He started squeezing and continued to scream at me. Then he asked why I was in bed using the nebulizer and hadn't done my chores. It was the first chance I had to say anything, and I barely managed to say I couldn't breathe, partly due to my asthma, partly due to him squeezing my ribs. I will never forget the look on his face when I said that. It was pure rage and hatred, a truly psychopathic stare. He looked at me with the intent to harm. Then he squeezed harder, got close to my face so I could feel his breath and said, "Do you want to know what it's like not to breathe?" Then he let go of my hair, placed his large palm over my mouth and nose, and began to suffocate me. He was trying to kill me. The panic I felt was overwhelming. I was terrified. I started clawing at his hand. I was beginning to lose consciousness when he finally let go and literally threw me down the stairs. My baby sister was at the bottom of the stairs and saw the whole thing. After that, I went to the kitchen and did all the dishes. I don't remember much of the rest of the night. The next morning, my mom took me to the doctor, who immediately called her out, yelling that she was being irresponsible. He noticed my lips and fingertips were blue and called 911. I don't remember the first few days of my hospital stay. I was basically in a drug-induced coma to prevent my lungs from shutting down. My stepfather was never held accountable for what he did. I've given birth to 2 children, suffered migraines, a spinal headache, a car accident, and countless emotional traumas and abuses, but that moment still stands out. It's hard to explain the feeling of looking into the eyes of someone who, in that moment, is trying to end your life. Story 21. I watched a 4-year-old child get run over and die in the road. I was waiting at a traffic light on foot, and a family group was next to me. They had bags from the Early Learning Center, a UK store for young children. Both of our groups arrived just before the green pedestrian light turned red, and the grandmother in the family group jogged across just in time. The lights changed and cars started to move. The child suddenly darted out, trying to cross the road. I wasn't really paying attention, lost in thought, but I remember thinking abstractly, "Oh, he'll just move between the gaps in the cars." I was thinking as if he were an adult who had made a rational decision. It was a 3-lane road. He got to the far side of the first lane, saw a car coming, and froze. It hit him with its corner and sent him flying into the near side of the middle lane. The mother screamed, "Jamie, no!" I'll never forget that shout. I've never heard such pure anguish before or since. A 4-wheel drive vehicle then hit him. He was directly beneath its right wheels. Both the front and rear wheels ran over him. "Bat him! Bat him!" The mother screamed, "Oh my God!" He was lying in the road. His blood was incredibly bright red. I was the first to react and went out to stop the cars. I thought about performing first aid. I had a little training, but I decided that touching his mangled little body might do more harm than good. While the police and ambulance arrived, I waited with and comforted the driver of the 4-wheel drive. She was a mother herself and of course felt awful, though there was no way she could have seen it coming. It was my 20th birthday. Story 22. When I was about 10, my mom, brother, and I were headed to Florida from New York. My grandma lived in Maryland, so we decided to stay the night there before continuing the drive. When we arrived, she was busy cooking and baking for us. I remember bread being absolutely everywhere, piled even on the guest bed, but we couldn't find her anywhere in the house. It turns out she had slipped on her bed sheets while getting out of bed, fallen, and passed away wrapped in sheets on the far side of the bed. I don't recall who found her first. All I remember is my mother wailing over her body while I tried to tell the 911 dispatcher our address. There was no blood or disturbing scene, but seeing my mother like that was the worst thing I've ever experienced. I couldn't even summon the strength to comfort her. I didn't do anything. The paramedics said we were strong and that sometimes grandchildren don't realize what's happened. But I knew. I just couldn't fathom the pain my mother was in. From that day forward, I've tried to be the most open and loving son I can be. I can't imagine my life ever being so emotionally distant from her again. Story 23. This was the first year the 2 high schools in my county had consolidated. The 9th and 10th graders were in one school, and the 11th and 12th were in another. I was in 9th grade. These 2 schools had previously been mortal enemies. One was considered wealthy and stuck up, the other poor but filled with good people. A lot of fights broke out because of this. There were 36 fights within the first week. I live in a rural area. A kid came to school with a red backpack that had a sun on it, the color and mascot for the poorer school. 3 guys jumped him and tore his backpack in half. Other fights were over relationships. One guy punched another because he got his girlfriend pregnant. The other fought back and shoved him into a glass display case, cutting him up severely. A police officer on duty came up to the guy stuck on the shattered glass and tased him. I found out later that the officer was related to the boy who threw the first punch. That's why he tased the other kid. But even that wasn't the worst fight I'd ever seen. I was standing in the lunch line, and 2 people in front of me was a kid with Asperger's. He was just outside the serving tables and used the hand sanitizer next to the door. When he pushed the nozzle, it malfunctioned and squirted directly into the eye of the person behind me. I turned to apologize for Josh. He was my friend, and I knew he didn't mean to do it. As I was turning, I was shoved hard by a tall, muscular student. He was headed straight for Josh. I tried to yell stop, but I couldn't get the words out. What I saw next horrified me. The taller student started punching Josh in the back of the head, then shoved him face first into the brick wall. He turned him around and pounded his face, screaming, "Say you're sorry, you freak!" Josh mumbled an apology, crying, and the student kicked him to the floor, then kicked him in a spiral across the ground. He pulled Josh's arm and dislocated it, then kept kicking his face until it was barely recognizable. Blood was everywhere. And the lunch ladies laughed. They actually laughed. I threw up right there on the floor. The police came, and they arrested Josh. Josh had a broken nose, a severely cut eye, 7 broken teeth, a dislocated arm, and a punctured lung from a broken rib, and he was the one taken away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, the attacker got his lunch, and his friends cheered. I told them off. I said, "You sick people. That boy tried to clean his hands and was nearly killed for it. You're cheering on someone who sees violence as justice." Not the most eloquent thing I've ever said, but I meant it. One of the attacker's friends was in my class, and thankfully knew I wasn't someone to cross, so I wasn't hurt for speaking up. Josh didn't come back to school for weeks. Witnesses were being called, but I wasn't asked. Maybe because I threw up every time I thought about it. That experience changed my life. Now I can't stand when people talk about wanting to watch fights. I've ended relationships over it. If you enjoy watching people hurt each other, you're not tough, you're heartless, because attempted murder isn't entertainment. Story 24. My best friend moved to Colorado between 7th and 8th grade. During that time span, he met new people, as you should. We kept in touch the entire time, and through him, via MSN, I got to meet his new friends. Marley was the one who hit me the hardest. It probably sounds silly because we were so young, but I was floored by how gorgeous she was. She and I hit it off right away, which never happened to me, especially not with someone that pretty. I was just an average-looking, nerdy kid growing up. You get the picture. He introduced us on January 12th, and for the next few months we became incredibly close. Every day at 6 p.m. she would log on. 6 p.m. like clockwork, every single day. She trusted me more than she trusted anyone else. For her sake, I won't go into the details of what she told me, but I was someone she confided in deeply. Around sometime in the spring, I found out she went to the hospital and was gone for 2 weeks. I didn't know why at the time, but I later found out it was due to an attempt to take her own life. I didn't know what to think. The group I grew up with often had problems like cutting and being very emotional about things that didn't seem big to others. That should have been a serious red flag for me, but I didn't recognize it. When she came back, we kept talking and hanging out online like nothing had happened. Maybe that's why she liked talking to me. I didn't bring the outside world into our conversations. But I digress. By fall, I would honestly say I loved her. She never got boring. She always wanted to talk to me. She made me feel like a normal person, like I had a personality and something interesting to say, when in reality I was just a nerdy, slightly chubby kid. She helped shape me into a person. On October 18th, she and I did our usual nightly webcam chat, staying up into the early hours of the morning. Something felt different. She was more open, more carefree during that conversation. When it hit 2 a.m., I called it a night and said I was going to bed. I think she said something like, "Please don't," like she wanted me to stay for some reason, but I don't clearly remember. She ended the call with, "I love you. Goodbye." I still remember the look in her eyes when she said it. Goodbye. I didn't catch the meaning behind it. To this day, I wish I had. I wish I had seen what she was trying to say. I wish I had done something. The next day, 6 p.m. rolled around. She always got on at 6 p.m. like clockwork, but she didn't. I got worried and texted her, but never got a reply. At 5 p.m. the following day, I was sitting at my laptop doing nothing, still thinking about how she hadn't been on. Then I got a message from a mutual friend. I didn't really talk to her, so it was surprising to get anything from her. Marley is dead. It wasn't like I got hit by a wave of grief or crushed under a waterfall of emotion. I felt nothing, just complete, overwhelming nothing. I was sad, but it was like a huge part of my consciousness was ripped out of me. That feeling of emptiness is the most unpleasant thing I've ever experienced. That day was 6 years ago last Saturday. I don't remember if I cried, but I know that even thinking about it now makes me tear up. I know others have been through worse, but this is the scar I got when I was just 13 years old, and it's something I never want anyone else to have to feel. Story 25. Actually, you know what? The one I wrote about earlier wasn't the worst. The worst was waking up in the middle of the night, 12 weeks pregnant, to blood everywhere. Thinking I could just go to the bathroom and clean myself up before waking my husband, I stumbled down the stairs and into the bathroom, where the bleeding got so much worse. In 2 or 3 minutes flat, the bathroom looked like a crime scene. I ended up unable to walk due to the cramping and pain, screaming for my husband while hoping like hell I didn't wake our other kids. My male roommate stumbled into the bathroom, nearly got sick, and ran to get my husband. Then came the ambulance ride, triage at the hospital, and being shoved into a room with a specimen cup and told to give a urine sample. My blood pressure was 60/30. I was in shock, already beginning to grieve the child I was losing, and I was alone. My husband had to stay behind to find a sitter, and yet they wanted me to walk to the end of the hall and give a urine sample. I just sat on the bed in a steadily expanding pool of blood, crying while people walked past and stared. By the time my husband arrived, he had to carry me to the bathroom. That's where I finished the miscarriage, alone, in a hospital bathroom. And then I nearly passed out in the blood on the floor. Story 26. I'm a musician from a small town in the Midwest and had just lined up my first session gig in LA. I booked a flight and planned to stay with a friend of a friend. When I landed, my ride was late to pick me up, but eventually they arrived and we headed to a bar near the ocean to grab food and beers. While there, I noticed my dad had posted a picture of a place we used to go to smoke cigars and fish, but the caption he wrote was out of character. It read, "Nice resting place. Bye, y'all." I immediately knew what was going on, though I was afraid to admit it. First, I called his phone. No answer. I left a voicemail, calling him out and begging him to reconsider. Then I called my mom, who was still at work and had no idea what was happening. I asked her to check on things. After that, I called my brothers to warn them of my suspicions. They told me to relax. It was probably nothing. I was about 4 beers in when my mom called, frantic. "It doesn't look good. We found a note." I turned to the friend of a friend and asked for help getting to the airport. She said, "Well, there's nothing you can do until you get a flight, so can you just hang out here while I go to yoga?" We ended up stopping by her friend's house, where someone asked if I was okay. I told them what was going on. They asked if I wanted to hit a pipe to relax. I assumed it was marijuana. It wasn't. To this day, I don't know what was in it, but I hallucinated hard. I wandered around neighborhoods in LA, panicked and disoriented. Eventually, I stumbled upon a place holding an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. They took me in, gave me water, calmed me down, and talked with me. When I'd come down a bit, I called the friend of a friend. She had gone to a party but gave me the address. I walked 3 miles to find the house. There she was with her friend, bent over the biggest table of drugs I'd ever seen. I asked if she could help me get to a hotel near the airport. She told me to chill out and handed me the keys to her Lexus SUV. So I drove to a hotel near LAX, still half drunk and hallucinating. I booked a room so I'd be safe. I called the airline, and to their credit, thank you Southwest, they were compassionate and rebooked me for a 6 a.m. flight. It was around 4 a.m. at that point. I left the Lexus keys with the concierge and her phone number. I took the shuttle to LAX, flew home, and immediately had to console my mom. They found my dad at the fishing spot from the photo. He had taken his own life in his truck. I checked the voicemail on his phone. He had received my message. Then came the funeral. Then came the moment I had to drive the truck, his truck, with towels on the seats, to my brother's house. We used a pressure washer to clean out all the blood. I lost the session work in LA. Story 27. Having to tell my brother our father died. I was 19 and he was 22. On the way to his house, I didn't once think about my nephew being there. My brother had struggled with prescription drugs up until the day his son was born. As soon as I opened the door to his house, he was holding his son. All I could do was gently take my nephew and bring him into another room. My brother thought he was in trouble since the chief of police was with me. He was my dad's best friend. I heard him saying, "I haven't done anything. I haven't even left the house." He was on house arrest at the time. I ran in, grabbed him in a hug, and just said, "I'm so sorry, man. You didn't do anything wrong. Dad died last night." I felt the impact it had on him, like I was being told for the first time again. He fought to get away from me, but I was much stronger than my big brother. We just collapsed on the floor and cried together. To think he went from fearing his life was over to finding out our father's life was. It's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I still apologize to him for how I handled it, but he doesn't remember much from that day. Story 28. When I was 16 years old, I found out 4 of my friends died in a car accident, one of them being my best friend in the entire world. What made it especially painful was that the summer before, he and I were inseparable. I spent every day with him, playing video games with him and his younger brother, who's now like a brother to me. and just having the time of our teenage lives. But something stupid happened, and we got into a fight. We didn't really talk for a while after that. We had an auto tech class together for 5 periods a day. The teacher was out sick one day, so we had a substitute, basically a 5-hour catch-up session. We talked, we laughed, we relived memories, and before leaving, we promised that the next summer would be a blast. The next morning, I woke up to my sister saying something had happened. An accident. Somehow my heart already knew it was him. She said the words, "Your friend was in an accident with 3 others." And I instantly knew who those 3 were. I just knew. At that moment, my world shattered. I lost my best friend. I lost 3 other good friends. I felt betrayed because we had just spoken and made plans for a future summer. It was the first time I ever experienced death. I'm 28 years old now, and I still can't talk about that day without getting choked up. Story 29. I was suffering from depression. I had contemplated ending my life, but ultimately decided not to. The next day, I checked into the local mental hospital. I told them I was there voluntarily and did not pose a danger. They said they didn't have any free beds, except in the closed ward. They encouraged me to stay just for a few nights until a room opened up in the regular unit. I reluctantly agreed. I visited the lockdown ward and I was terrified. The windows were so dirty you couldn't see through them. People were screaming, urinating, and vomiting in the halls. My assigned room had no window to the outside, only one looking into the nurse's station for 24/7 surveillance. Alarmed, I told the doctor no. That's when a strong male nurse pushed a chair in front of the door and sat down. "I'm afraid we can't let you leave," the doctor said. I protested. I had come there voluntarily. My parents were with me. I gave the doctor the numbers for my therapist and psychiatrist, people who could vouch for me. She didn't call them. It was already evening, and she didn't want to disturb her supervisor. I said I'd call the police, but she made it clear they wouldn't help me. After 72 hours, I'd be allowed to summon a judge, who would then decide whether I could go home or be kept longer. I was crushed. I went to my bed and collapsed, crying. It was my worst nightmare. The male nurse gave me an Ativan tablet. That made things bearable. The next day, the supervising doctor visited. I explained everything, and he apologized and seemed embarrassed. He arranged to have me moved to the open, voluntary ward. When the original doctor returned, she handed me a paper to sign saying I had been there voluntarily. "I was not," I told her. "I'm not signing this. You forced me to stay." Coldly, she said, "If you want to get out of here anytime soon, you'll sign it." So I did. I threw away any chance of pursuing legal action for what had happened. After transferring to the open ward, I immediately checked out. I wanted nothing more to do with that place. It traumatized me. I had never truly known what it felt like to be held against my will, trapped behind barred windows. It was deeply humiliating and soul-crushing. There is a huge need for reform in mental health. That experience didn't help my depression. It worsened it. That kind of treatment would push even a healthy person to the edge. It's heartbreaking and appalling. Story 30. Cleaning my grandfather's garage and helping him paint it. I was moving stuff around and organizing when we came across a can of old gunpowder. My grandfather insisted we burn it rather than throw it in the trash. We went out behind the garage and poured the contents in a long line across the yard. Then he insisted I light it with a match. So I did. The gunpowder exploded in my face, caught my hair and face on fire, and had me screaming like a chicken with its head cut off. I immediately ran to the water fountain in our yard, but no water came out. I wasted time trying to get it to work. Then my next rational thought was to run to the house, which was a fair distance from the garage. I was half blinded by the pain in my face, scared out of my mind and barely able to see. Once inside, I ran to the bathroom and saw myself in the mirror. Burns across my face, missing patches of skin, no eyebrows, and smoldering hair. My grandfather came into the house and I immediately told him I needed to go to the hospital. Long story short, I spent 3 days in the burn ward, but made a full recovery thanks to the amazing doctors. The worst part wasn't even the burns. It was the emotional pain I felt for my grandfather. I didn't want him to feel like it was his fault. That thought hurt more than the actual injuries. Story 31. My emotionally destructive relationship with my ex-girlfriend. We started dating in the summer. It was the best summer of my life. We talked constantly. We didn't see each other much because we went to different schools and lived far apart. But when we did, we had fun. Then school started. Suddenly, I was her lowest priority. She stopped reaching out. She made no effort to see me. Months would go by without us seeing each other, and she barely spoke to me online like she used to. When we did talk, she would tell me how awful her friends were, and I'd listen, always offering comfort. I should have ended it after a few months, but I convinced myself I was staying for the right reasons. So I endured her neglect for 2 long years. I was too miserable to stay, but too emotionally devoted to her to leave. I got used to the dull ache in my chest every time she told me she was too busy, or that her friends had invited her out for the weekend. I became addicted to the pain. She was everything to me, my only comfort when I was upset or needed someone. But her problems always came first. I let that go on for too long. I forced myself to ignore my own emotional needs, and now I barely remember how to express them. What's worse, I've convinced myself that being this way is a kind of strength. I see my loneliness as a sign that I can cope. But deep down, it's isolation. We eventually broke up after I started university, but that emotional isolation left its mark. I still remember the last time I saw her, the day we broke up. She asked me if I would be okay. I smiled and said, "No, I'm really not." Then I walked away, and I haven't been okay since. I never cried about it. I never really talked about it. That was February 2008. I don't think it's truly hit me even now. More recently, I became a full-time caregiver for my grandmother, who has dementia. I spent 2 years watching the woman who raised me slowly fade, replaced by someone clumsy and forgetful. She would wander every night, so I had to adjust. I gave her tablets, made her tea, and watched the same episodes of Midsummer Murders for 2 years, sleeping just 4 hours a night, always between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. I gave up my job, my social life, and dating just to be there full-time. She drove me mad some nights, waking up constantly, worrying about imaginary things and people. It still hurts to see what dementia has done to her. But I visit her in the nursing home regularly because it makes her happy. And for that, I'm willing to suffer anything. Watching her fade breaks my heart, but I'll keep showing up because she showed up for me. Story 32. Long story short, while in Costa Rica sleeping in a bungalow, I was awoken in the middle of the night by some noise and then saw a headlamp in my room. The next thing I knew, there was a gun to my head and a knife at my ribs. The intruder didn't waste any time. He tied up my wrists and feet using my own shoelaces and secured my wrists even further with my belt. One of my socks was stuffed in my mouth and held in place with my headlamp strap. He kept saying, "If you make a sound, I make you hurt." For about 20 minutes, he rifled through my belongings. Eventually, he found a little cash in one of my pockets and my iPhone. He left the room, and I waited a couple of minutes before trying to hop toward the door. I got about 5 feet away when he suddenly came back in, shoved his gun in my face, rammed it into my forehead, and ordered me back onto the bed. I obeyed. Then he grabbed a pillowcase, put it over my head, and that's when I really thought it was over. He left again. I waited a little while, then got up, still tied, pillowcase over my head. And here's where, strangely enough, I find a shred of humor in the situation. Imagine a guy tied up at the wrists and ankles, stumbling around with a pillowcase on his head, trying to shake it off like a dog. That was me. Eventually, I got it off. I freed my feet and headed up to the main house to find one of the staff members who helped untie my wrists. Thankfully, I wasn't harmed. I only lost a little cash and my phone. But I'll never forget waking up to that headlamp, the gun in my face, or the sheer helplessness of being tied up and completely at someone else's mercy.